He thought he was watching progress rise on the land his family had protected for generations. Rows of polished new homes, fresh sidewalks, bright young families moving in, none of them knowing the truth beneath their feet. But when a black landowner discovered that an entire neighborhood had been built on property that was never for sale, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back in the way they expected. Instead, he let them build deeper into mistake that would expose something far darker than stolen land. And the moment his silence finally broke, everything changed. But what he did next would shake the entire community in ways no one was prepared for. Calvin Redden lived a life most people overlooked. He woke early, brewed the same strong coffee every morning, and drove his old Chevy down the quiet Texas roads his family had traveled for generations. He wasn't loud, he wasn't political, and he wasn't the type to go looking for conflict. He carried himself with the calm steadiness of a man who knew exactly where he stood, because the land beneath him had always been his anchor. That land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was his grandfather's legacy, his father's promise, and the one thing Calvin could count on in a world that didn't always treat black families with fairness. He kept the deed tucked inside a fireproof safe, not out of fear but out of respect. Generations had fought to keep what was theirs, and Calvin intended to honor that. But in recent months, he'd noticed changes. Survey flags he didn't place. Tire tracks leading across soil no one else had permission to touch. And then the sound of engines, bulldozers crawling across the horizon like steel beasts. At first, he thought it was a mistake. A simple misunderstanding. Something that would stop as soon as someone checked the records. But it didn't stop. Each day, more machines arrived. More trees fell. More strangers walked the land with clipboards and blueprints, acting as if the ground belonged to them. And standing at the boundary, Calvin felt something shift inside him. A quiet tension, a familiar warning that history had a way of repeating itself if you weren't ready. He didn't know it yet, but the choices he made next would pull him into a battle far bigger than property lines. Because what he was about to uncover would hit harder than anyone expected, and the real fight was only beginning. Calvin's unease sharpened into certainty the moment he saw the first concrete slab poured on land that legally carried his family's name. The construction crews moved with the confidence of people who believed they had every right to be there, carving out roads, lifting frames, and staking claim to a future that didn't belong to them. Calvin watched from a distance at first, gripping the hood of his truck as he took photos, the weight of history pressing on his chest. His grandfather had warned him about men who smiled as they took what wasn't theirs, signing papers they never had the right to sign, and twisting the law into a weapon. Calvin had hoped those days were behind them. But as he watched strangers grind their machinery across his inheritance, he could feel old wounds splitting open. Still, he didn't confront anyone, not yet. He wanted to believe someone would catch the mistake, that someone in the county office would raise a flag, that someone in the HOA would question why permits weren't lining up. Instead, he saw the opposite. HOA President Janice Mann strutted across the construction site like a conqueror, pointing at houses, directing crews, and posing for photos as if she were the mastermind of a revival. She spoke to investors with confidence that came from believing she'd never be questioned. And Calvin felt that sting all too deeply. A white woman with influence didn't have to ask permission. She assumed authority. A black man with a deed still had to prove he belonged. When neighbors cautiously asked who owned the land, Janice brushed them aside with sharp smiles and rehearsed reassurances. And when county records remained unchanged, she dismissed the concerns as processing delays, waving off anyone who dared to challenge her. Each denial only tightened the knot in Calvin's stomach. He knew the pattern. He'd seen it in his father's stories, in the old newspapers his grandfather kept. Families of color being pushed aside, their claims ignored, their boundaries swallowed by people who thought power outranked truth. So Calvin began documenting everything. He kept logs, timestamps, and aerial photos. He saved every public announcement Janice made, every claim she boasted about, every update she shared with homeowners. The more she boasted, the more fuel she added to his case. Denise watched him with worry as the binders grew thicker, knowing the emotional toll, but also knowing the history that made this fight unavoidable. Calvin wasn't just defending land. He was defending legacy, dignity, and the right to exist without being overwritten. Meanwhile, the development exploded with momentum. Young families moved into newly finished homes, unaware they were stepping onto land they had no legal right to occupy. Children raced down sidewalks that traced over soil Calvin's grandfather once plowed. Couples planted flowers in yards where Calvin had once played as a child. Every truckload of furniture, every welcome mat, every porch light flickering on at dusk felt like another robbery in slow motion. And when whispers finally began, rumors of paperwork gaps, of missing signatures, of deeds that didn't match, Janice doubled down. She held emergency HOA meetings where she weaponized her authority, shutting down questions with icy confidence. To many, she was a voice of stability. To Calvin, she was the architect of an injustice unfolding in real time. But the facade was starting to crack. A few homeowners began digging for answers. A retired couple discovered the subdivision didn't appear on preliminary county tax rolls. A schoolteacher found inconsistencies in the plat maps. A longtime resident pulled the deed history himself and found a name that shocked him, Redden. That was when tension snapped into confrontation. At an HOA meeting packed with nervous homeowners, Greg Simmons stood up with documents in hand and asked the one question Janice had been dodging for months. Who actually owns this land? Silence hit the room like a dropped hammer. Janice's expression faltered for the first time, and at the back of the room, calm and steady, Calvin watched her face as she realized the truth was finally slipping out of her control. All the pieces were moving now. Homeowners suspicious, officials confused, Janice cornered, and Calvin prepared with more evidence than she could ever bury. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was here, and the moment Calvin stepped forward, everything that had been built on lies was about to come crashing down. But what happened when Calvin finally revealed the truth will be more explosive than anything the neighborhood had ever seen.